But I think everybody is here except for the government. And we do have some new people, I guess. Yes. You want to tell us who you are?
Well, Lucy was here last year.
Lucy, hi Lucy. Yes, I remember Lucy. Okay.
And the baby was Ralph's baby.
Very good. Very good. Anyone here who needs is there anyone here who needs sacraments but hasn't filled out a form so I know? Like if you're here to learn more about the faith, that's great. Tell Bob who you are so that he can get you on the mailing list and text list and all that stuff. But if you're here because you're coming in from another faith denomination, or if you're a Catholic and you never made your confirmation, or I need to know that so I could get the paperwork with the diocese and so forth. So is there anybody in that situation who needs that?
I think we need to have our marriage.
That's not part of OCIA though. That's a separate thing.
Okay.
OCIA is for those. Well, technically, OCIA is for the unbaptized. That was the churches. But most parishes are not big enough to, and certainly we're not big enough to have. They want to have a separate class for OCIA for the non-baptized, a separate class for adult confirmation, a separate class for just general adult ed. That doesn't really make sense for us. So we do it all. We do it all here, and I think it works. I mean, I think
some of the real large parishes have a different class for bald people, and some from with hair. I think that's getting carried away.
Oh, it's right.
Well, some have schools too.
So Audrey, thank you for this. This is beautiful.
You're welcome.
So before we start we never quite. I gave kind of the bum's rush to that last part of the Lord's Prayer. Lead us not into temptation, because, and then I want to look. I realized it's not on your thing there, but I don't have anything there about the part that people call the Protestant part of the Our Father, the "For Thine is the Kingdom, the Power," which is not Protestant. It's actually Catholic. I'll tell you about that when we're done with it. But any questions? The part about "lead us not into temptation" is probably for many people the most controversial part of the Our Father. The constant question is how kind of a loving God can lead a temptation. Has the idea of entrapment, like I'm going to set a trap for them and I'll get them at Garley. But I think, as we mentioned last week, God is never the source of temptation. So that should be the one takeaway from this part that you should always keep foremost in your mind. God will never lead you into temptation. Okay? The meaning of the word temptation has kind of changed over the centuries. Temptation really, in its original understanding, was a test, a trial, which God may do. God gives you crosses to bear, and we'll talk when we're going to get to the class on a deeper dive into prayer life, which Jack asked for, and I'm actually working on that now. We're going to talk a little bit about what I spoke about in last week's homily, if you remember it, about the doubts and the dark night of the soul, and Mother Teresa. I'm going to mention it again, I think, in next week's homily, because, Mother Teresa said in that book, she said in most of her adult life, she felt nothing of the presence of God. Nothing.
Right after Mass, I went home and
It's a difficult book to read. She felt the absolute absence of God. The great Saint Therese of Lisieux, right? I'm tempted with atheism, Why? How could that possibly be? these are people who experience these doubts, these great temptations to atheism. We're going to look at this in greater detail. The spiritual masters, some of the great spiritual teachers of the last 2,000 years, look at the various stages of the spiritual life. St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa, you know that great theological work, the Summa, he says your spiritual life is analogous to the stages you experience in your physical life. You start in infancy, move toward childhood, move towards adolescence, move towards adulthood. Everything in the created order. Everything. Did I say everything? Yes, I meant everything. Everything in the created order. Just look around, is meant to teach you, point you to something about God. And Thomas Aquinas is saying, a child, children believe in Santa Claus. Right? They don't question that. I mean, you see it happen, right? As they get older, they realize, wait a minute here, they were pulling something over. You mean our daughter... Oh, yeah. Okay. Our daughter believed in the... Well, how about, is the Easter Bunny safe? I don't know. Our daughter believed in the Easter... All right, I'll drop it. Well, as we'll see, as we'll talk about, these people that, like Mother Teresa, Saint Therese of Lisieux, Thomas Aquinas, they are at the heights of spiritual perfection. Okay, and they experience these tremendous doubts, these tremendous temptations toward atheism, towards absence of God, because God is bringing them to the cross. He's bringing them to the ultimate perfection. Okay, that's what's happening there. I mentioned Mother Teresa spent, she had, complete in her adult life, she felt the absence of God, that God was not with her. She felt that she was all alone. And she also spent at least 3 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week before the Blessed Sacrament. Okay? So it's not like, okay, God, the hell with you. You abandoned me, I'm going to abandon you. He is moving you forward. He is drawing you. It's just like an athlete, right? An athlete, if you aspire to, like Bob's granddaughter there, to Olympics, I mean, you put in, 10, 15 minutes a week training? Is that right? Is that how that works?
27, about 21 hours a week.
21 hours a week. I was going to say some people 40, 50 hours a week, and you push and you push and you push and you push, and it's not, this is the same, God is saying, it's a coach. God is being a coach for these great saints. He's saying, fine, you're striving for perfection. You're striving for, because Jesus said in Matthew's gospel, you must be, that's going to be the theme of this class on prayer that's coming up. You must be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. And that was actually a source of great controversy throughout the history of the church. I mean, no, he couldn't have possibly meant that. Our understanding, the doctrinal teaching of the church is he said it and he meant it. For us, humanly, it's impossible. With God, all things are possible. So I'm probably getting ahead of myself here, but I remember many years ago, I was always, never in a serious way, I always liked rowing. Like crew kind of thing, rowing when I was in much better shape years back. And I had a friend he was a coach for the crew at the University of Rochester, and they had a good crew. And I remember he said to me, you want to see what it's like to train to be on crew? And I said, sure, I'll do it. Well, we went out, and I mean, it was brutal. I mean, I thought I'm going to drop dead. I mean, I couldn't take it. While he's screaming at me, come on, you call this, I'm using obscenities and everything else, you call this, move. And I'm pushing myself as hard as I can. And he goes, this is what you go through every day if you want to be on crew at the University of Rochester. This is what a coach is going to do to you every single day. They're going to push you. You're going to feel like you want to die. What did Saint Therese of Lisieux say? If I didn't have faith, I would have committed suicide a long time ago. Okay. So anyway, that's the kind of growth we are all called to in our spiritual lives. We are all called to perfection. And you know you're getting there when you start to experience deep, deep struggles, deep, deep doubts, deep, deep, serious problems. St. Thomas Aquinas, childhood, adolescent, we're most of us in the adolescent phase, most of us, right? We're rebellious, we're you want to see an adult, you look at Mother Teresa, you look at St. Therese of Lisieux, you look at St. John of the Cross. Those are the adults. Those are the ones who are mature in their faith, have reached, we'll talk about it, there's names for it. The beginning of the spiritual life, the childhood is called the purgative stage, and the adolescent stage is called the illuminative stage. It sounds good, but we all want to be illuminated. And then finally, the stage of perfection is called the unitive stage, unity with God. That's what we're called. Anyway, I'm getting way off topic here, but that's what we're going to talk to. So we're going to look not only on what the spiritual masters, the great saints have said about prayer, but also we're going to base it on the catechism, the obstacles to prayer, and what you could do about it, because that's, I think, something that we all struggle with. We all have obstacles to pray, right? Imagine Mother Teresa with all her all the work she had to do with the poor, right? I mean, all her, she got the Nobel Peace Prize because of the incredible work she did for the poor. She worked herself tirelessly out in the streets of Calcutta, but yet not one day would go by without at least 3 hours before the Blessed Sacrament. Did she have faith, or did she have faith? She had faith greater than, hopefully we're all going to have that one day. I couldn't hold a candle to her kind of faith. Okay. Anyway, so the bottom line there was God will never, I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but God will never lead us into temptation. God is not a God of entrapment. We ask him to limit, it's like the great martyrs. You don't go looking for martyrdom. You may desire it to show your love for God. Desiring it is okay? But looking to become martyred is not something that, it's not part of a healthy spirituality. If it comes your way, God, this is to lead me not into temptation. This is the, I told you the story, I think, and I can't remember. I was going to look it up, but I can't remember. I never did, because I don't remember what I had for lunch yesterday. But the one great saint, he was a bishop of the church. You found him. Fantastic.
We found one.
Oh.
I'm not sure if there's a second one. I've only seen one.
Ask Mary, and if not, she'll order one ASAP.
Do you want to use this? Because there's two of you.
I know. I don't know if that would look odd to use one and not two. Wait until we get a second one.
You do.
And it's odd, yesterday at communion a host fell, but it fell in the sleeve of my dalmatic, so I was able to salvage it. And this was a man receiving on the tongue, but again, when you receive on the tongue, open your mouth and put out your tongue so I don't have to try to put a quarter in the slot, and put your head back so gravity is working for me. People kind of just, and if they don't grab it, it'll fall. And the design is to show them the pattern, by the way, just so. In case a host should fall, that will catch it. That's a beautiful one.
It is.
I say even when using the pattern, you have to be very careful. St. Augustine had an experience where a host had fallen, and I had the pattern there, but because it's so thin, the air, it felt like a feather. It did this and then that way.
Our hosts are a little bit heavier than most.
Yeah.
They're like a more weedy, consistency. But like people who receive on the hand, the problem is you can't, if they're going to receive like this, you can't put the paten there. So you put the paten there, and what I've seen happen is the host falls, hits the paten, bounces off, and falls on the floor.
Probably if they're receiving on their hands, you won't use it, right?
Yeah, well, ceremonially we'll probably use it, although its effectiveness is going to it may catch it. It may catch it. So,
It does bring reverence.
it brings reverence. See, that's what we're trying to do. And thankfully, we have Akash here who is working with us to do this, to make the liturgy more reverent, to elevate this. And because it's so easy for us to take things for granted. And no, this is my body. Okay, where's my host? I want to go to communion. What time? I wonder what they're going to have at hospitality. We want to help people focus their hearts and minds to God. That's the purpose of liturgy, right? Not to dream about what kind of goodies they're going to have at hospitality. And the more beautiful we make the liturgy, the easier it'll be for everybody there to focus their hearts and minds to God. So that's the whole idea.
That's one of those temptations you was talking about.
That's right. That's right.
I think one of the problems that people have with that concept in the Lord's Prayer about lead us not into temptation, and you were talking about the hardship of it, I think it's because a lot of people confuse temptation with trial.
Yeah. Temptation, the meaning of temptation is testing, a test, a testing of faith. That's what I started to tell. You pray that this won't happen to you. But in the early church, there was this one bishop that came from I forgot his name. I've got to figure out his name. He came from a very, very wealthy family. And he used his personal wealth to do really good things as bishop. He was building hospitals and schools and doing outreach centers to help feed the poor and so forth. But it was during the time of one of the Roman emperors, I don't know, one of the Caesars, I don't know which one. And the persecutions were kind of localized, but it came to where his community was, one of the localized persecutions. And the governor said, you got to put some incense on the altar to Caesar. Otherwise, I'm going to have you arrested, And this bishop wouldn't do it. And the governor said to him, come on, look at all the good work you're doing. If just take one grain of incense, take one grain and throw it on the fire and I'll let you go. And all this wonderful stuff can continue. And he said, no. And he was martyred for it, And it's the idea that one little grain of incense could make the whole difference with you and your faith, right? That's what we pray when we say, lead us not into temptation. Please, Lord, don't let that happen to me, that the governor says, throw one grain of incense. Because if it does happen to you, then your prayer has to be, Lord, give me the grace to say no. I will not put even one grain of incense on that fire. So that's what lead us not into temptation. For whatever reason, we don't know why, God has allowed Satan to prowl the earth. Okay? Why he didn't, but he didn't. Right?
Polycarp.
Was Polycarp? Thank you. And what year was he? He's very early.
155.
155. Polycarp was a disciple of the Apostle John. How's that? That's one handshake away, as they call it. Right? One handshake away. Thank you for looking that. I always forget when I get home. I keep telling myself, I'm going to look that up again. And I always forget. But I forget everything. So, thank you. So you see a couple of the comments there. We're asking God to set limits on the tests. This is the same handout we're finishing up from last week. Not to let them get out of control. And the word lead us not into temptation. There's a philosophical and a biblical concept that the modern world is not very comfortable with. It's mentioned its primary causality. Yes, who is the primary cause of that governor telling the Polycarp to throw the grain? God is the first cause of everything, but that doesn't mean God is the cause of evil. Okay, evil is a privation; it's a turning away from God. It's all tied up with this free will business of ours. We have the ability to choose God or to choose against God. It's a misuse of our human freedom. Human freedom is not, especially for Memorial Day, right? Freedom is not the ability to do whatever we want. Freedom is the ability to choose to do the right thing. Okay? And the right thing, of course, is based on God's law. Oh, we talked about the bowling example. God is not the source of your temptation. James, I think we quoted James, so I don't think, no one experienced temptation should say, I am being tempted by God. For God is not subject to temptation, to evil, and he himself tempts no one. Temptation is from the devil. Somewhat, this is where we didn't get, and I wanted to point out, somewhat recently, Pope Francis approved a change in the Italian translation of the Our Father, put forward not by Pope Francis, it was put forward by the Italian Bishops' Conference. They're the ones who wanted to change the thing. And they changed there. In Italy, they say the Our Father, do not abandon us to temptation. Okay. The problem, as you see there, centers on translating that Greek word diatomos into English, into the English word temptation. That pirasimos really means an experiment, a trial, a proving. So in the New Testament, trial of man's fidelity, integrity, virtue, constancy on account of an enticement to sin, or an external or internal. It's also applied to the devil's attempts in the desert to divert them. It says Jesus was tempted in the desert. That pirasimos is the word used in the Greek New Testament. And man rebelled against God, challenging God's power and justice, putting God to the test, kind of like Adam did in the garden. A better translation of the Greek Our Father would be, do not lead us into a time of testing, or do not lead us into a time of trial, followed by, deliver us from the evil one. Okay? Keep us safe from the devil. So, this is all important because, as we said, Audrey asked for this deeper understanding of the Lord's Prayer. And so when you say, all of us, we rattle off these words, lead us not into temptation and deliver us from evil. I mean, right there, just those two phrases, lead us not into temptation, deliver us from evil. You could spend an hour meditating on, you do scriptural meditation, and what we're going to talk about when we talk about prayer, that Lectio Divina, which is taking a brief passage from Scripture and reading it and rereading it and then reflecting on what it means, And there's a great example of that. Lead us not into temptation means put us not to the test. Don't let it get, please protect us from having this happen to us. But if it does, may we be strong enough to do what we know you want us to do and protect us from evil. What does that mean? Evil is not a thing. Protect us from the devil. Protect us from the evil one. I think in the United States, we'll probably never change the Lord's Prayer at all because we're very interested in unity with Protestants. And I know a lot of our bishops see the Lord's Prayer as that one commonality that in our liturgy, that we say the Lord's Prayer exactly like they do, and so they're not going to be inclined to change it. There is this Christ's primary prayer during the Last Supper is, Father, that they may be one as you and I are one. And clearly we are not one, right? We are all over the map, all of us. So anything we could grasp at to remind us of our oneness.
Deacon, does all testing and temptation come from Satan?
Mostly comes from in here.
Within.
That's right, from my wanting what I want, okay? My fallen nature, right, that we always have. And we're going to look at that. That's I think it's on the last page on that handout that we never quite got to, and we'll get to it today.
That point you were just making about the trying to be in unity with Protestants and everything, I've recently heard several Protestant pastors make the point from the pulpit that we shouldn't be saying the Lord's Prayer at all. And the concept that they give is, hey, the Lord gave us this prayer, but that was before it was finished. And now that it is finished, we shouldn't be saying this.
So what do they want to say?
Well, to me, the ironic thing is that leads into praying exactly like how Jesus tells us not to pray right before he gives us the prayer, which is like, I know some Catholics make fun of it as the just prayer, but some of these prayers, At Protestant services, sometimes you're 20, 30 minutes in one prayer, and it's they call it the just prayer because it's like just.
Oh,
Just come be with us. Just do this. Just do that. Just.
We have somebody in this parish that people make fun of because she's always using that word, just, Lord, just give us this, and Lord, just help us with, Lord, just let us do that, you know, the just prayer.
Yeah, and it leads you into, because it leads into that sort of mindless babbling that Jesus gives right before he gives us the prayer. Yeah. Interesting. So they don't want to say the Lord's Prayer. Well, some of them. I wouldn't say all of them.
Well, see, there's 50,000 Protestant denominations on the IRS tax rolls. Some subset of them say we shouldn't say the Lord's Prayer. And if in that denomination somebody disagrees with that, they'll go start another denomination.
Yeah, and these people I'm talking about would be on the sort of evangelical, kind of like low church end of the spectrum.
Yeah. The ones that many Catholics are really trying to reach out to, you know, Catholics and evangelicals, because, you know, what's great, evangelicals are super sincere about their faith. I mean, and that's a good thing. They want to get it right, you know. We want those kind of people on our side, you know. So we don't want the kind of, you know, there are some mainstream Protestants that, you know, again, the main thing is the casserole, you know, in the social time after Mass, you know. That's not what I mean by unity with the Protestants. You know, we could come up with the casseroles too, but it's the people that are really serious about their faith that we want unity with. So, all right, so I think, you know, and this deliverance that we pray for, deliver us from evil. Nobody gives you deliverance besides Jesus Christ, right? Nobody. There's no other way. There's no way to do it. I think I had that quote here from Colossians, right? St. Paul said, he delivered us from the power of darkness and transformed us to the kingdom of his beloved Son. Isn't that what the Lord's Prayer says? It starts out with thy kingdom come, and then it ends with deliver us, okay? And the only person who will ever deliver us is Jesus Christ. Anything else here? The conclusions. Let's take a look at the conclusions. When saying the Lord's Prayer, there are two extremes to be avoided. One might say, well, I struggle. I don't really experience a lot of personal tenderness from the Father. Another might say, well, aren't you sort of falling into the trap of maybe turning the whole thing into just a me and daddy kind of thing and losing the content of the faith? There's that old Latin maxim, in medio stat virtus, the virtue lies in the middle, okay? Not any extreme, but in the middle. Okay, I think that you could, if there's anything I left out, you can read it. I think that concludes the Lord's Prayer. But on your sheet, that I don't even have in the last page of that handout, we're not going to have to read that whole page, because in there is the gospel. I start with the gospel for Ash Wednesday. And we looked at this when we started this Lord's Prayer thing. We looked at this in great detail. It's the when you give alms, you know, when you pray, when you fast. There's a complement to that in the first letter of John, okay, which I thought I had in there. And go back. What's one of my favorite? When Jesus says, when you pray, when you give alms, when you fast, if you want to understand the New Testament, you must understand what? The Old Testament. And if you want to understand the Old Testament, you must go back to the fall. You must go back to the garden, okay? Because that's what the whole faith is about. It's Jesus came to restore paradise, to restore the Garden of Eden. And he does that through the sacraments of the church. The church is the restoration of the Garden of Eden in this fallen world. Look at Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. Now the snake was the most cunning of all the wild animals that the Lord had made. He asked the woman, did God really say you shall not eat from any of the trees in the garden? The woman answered the snake, We may not eat of the fruit of the tree in the garden. It is only the fruit of the tree we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. It is only about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, you shall not eat or even touch it, or else you will die. Now notice, God didn't say that, right? God never said don't touch it. Right away, there's error in how Eve is responding, or the woman is responding to the serpent. God never said anything, don't touch it. He just said don't eat it. But the snake said to the woman, oh, you certainly will not die. And notice, God didn't say, if you eat it, I will kill you. It's, if you eat it, you will die. Okay? And actually, in Hebrew is an interesting language in that way, in that there are no superlatives. There's no good, better, best. God, it looks like it's a typo if you read it in the Hebrew. God didn't say, you will die. He says, you will die the death. And in the literal Hebrew, it says, you will die the death. That's why we say, holy, holy, holy in Mass, right? In English, we would say good, better, best, right? We have superlatives in English. We don't have, in Hebrew, they don't have superlatives. So if you want to say something is good, you say it's tov, good. If you want to say it's better, you say it's tov, tov. That's how you say it and communicate in Hebrew that it's better. If you want to say it's the best, it's tov, tov, tov. A triple. So we want to give the highest extreme holiness to God, and so we use the phrase holy, holy, holy. Okay. So what God said to the man and the woman is that you will die. Okay. Not only will you die, you won't die physically, but you'll die a more serious death. You'll die spiritually. And that's what happened. They lived. Adam and Eve ate the fruit, and they were fine. They put on the fig leaves and went about their unmerry way, right? With the pain and suffering they inflicted on themselves. They didn't die if they're eating the fruit, but yes, they did. They died a more serious death than natural death. They died spiritual death at that point. Okay. They were no longer in union with God like they were before the fall. But anyway, the snake said to the woman, you certainly will not die. God knows well that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like gods who know good and evil. And so what happened there? The woman saw that the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eyes, and the tree was desirable for gaining wisdom. So she took some of its fruit and ate it, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Okay? It's not like Adam is off doing whatever Adam is doing. Christy's not here. He would be fishing if he were Jamie. No. He is right there with her. You've heard me say this before in homilies, but he was his job was to guard and defend the garden and his wife who was in the garden. And he just kind of stood there and watched this whole thing happen and did nothing. Let her do it and then did it himself. And that's why we call that the sin of Adam. It sounds like Eve ate the fruit. Why don't we call it the sin of Eve? Well, because it was Adam's job, his God-given job, to guard the garden and his wife, and he failed. He failed by letting her eat that fruit. And so it is the sin of Adam, even though it sounds like Eve is the central character in this part. And that's because he was with her. He was standing right there watching this happen. He was supposed to go and stop it, even if it meant his death, because this is not some garden snake he's going after, right? This is the great Leviathan, as it's called elsewhere in Scripture. He would have to engage in a battle that he himself probably could not win. But did he call to God for help? He's saying, God, what's happening here? Come help me. No, he remained silent. And look at what happened. Yeah. So, then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew they were naked. That's almost saying God is saying, Who told you you were naked? I didn't tell you that. How did you know you were naked? You know, the devil told you that. So they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. But the three things there, the woman saw that the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eyes, and desirable for gaining wisdom. That has, in Catholic theology, that has a name. It's called the triple concupiscence. Right? Concupiscence is our inclination to sin, okay, to our fallen human nature. You know, you see a wallet on the ground with a lot of cash in it. You know, what's the right thing to do? Take the wallet and make sure it gets returned to its proper owner. How many people would, you know, be tempted to, maybe not do it, but wouldn't you be tempted to say, woo, I'll give them their wallet back with their credit cards and driver's license, but oh, just keep the cash. You know, no. That's concupiscence. That's the temptation to, you know, I could use that money. Look, if he has that much in his wallet, he doesn't need it. I need it. I'll take it. And John, the one who was Polycarp was the disciple of John. John, the beloved disciple. He says in his first letter, first letter of John, chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. Do not love the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desire of the flesh, and the desires of the eyes, and pride in possessions, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. Those three things, this happens a lot in Scripture. There's it's called a lot of things, but in the Bible itself, it's called like an inclusio, something that's happened toward the very end. You know, John's letter appears toward the very end of the Bible, brings you way back to something that happens in the beginning of the Bible, like in the book of Genesis. It happens in John's Gospel a lot. He taught, if you remember the reading from Saturday, yesterday was Saturday? Yeah, yesterday morning. It was about Peter asking about the disciple John who was at the side of Jesus. And it brings you back to the prologue of John's Gospel, which talks about Jesus who was at the side of the Father. Right? So Jesus is at the side of the Father and makes the Father known. John is at the side of Jesus who makes Jesus known, who makes the Father known. So there's all these kind of big structures, lots of these structural things in Scripture. But those three things John picks up are called the threefold concupiscence. The desires of the flesh. How do you conquer the desires of the flesh? You deny the flesh by fasting. You know, it's the same. We're going to talk about this in the prayer life thing, because it's all this. Paul talks about this in athletes that pummel their body, as Paul puts it. Paul talks about running a race. Do you want to do that? I mean, do you want to punish yourself so that you could win that race? Well, yes and no, right? I mean, you got to do it to win the race. You know, you're out there training every day, and you got to do it. You're going to run a marathon. If I'm going to run the Boston Marathon, if I start training a week before, I should be all set, right? You know? Thomas Aquinas is saying, don't be that silly. You know, if you got to start now. You got to start training now if you want to win the race. And Paul is talking about, look at how athletes punish their bodies to win a perishable crown. We're running for an imperishable one. So fight to win. Fight to win. Train, train, train. And that's what kind of fasting is. Fasting is not because God wants to punish us. God wants to see us suffer. We want to train our bodies to, because of the sin of Adam, we have these concupiscences. We have these tendencies towards sin. We're inclined to do things like, again, St. Paul says, I do the things I know I shouldn't do, and I don't do the things I know I should do. You know, and I'm a rational thinking human being. I have the ability to master myself and take control, just like an athlete can master his body and take control of his body so he can perform at whatever sport he's doing. Well, the same thing is true in the spiritual life. You want to get control of yourself and you want to master yourself. And the way you master desires of the flesh is fasting. Yeah, well, I'll show you, flesh. I'm going to deny this. I'm not going to have this. And it'll strengthen me, just like going to the gym for 8 hours strengthens an athlete that, he'd rather be doing other things. I would say, anybody here a kind of a pro or semi-pro or a serious, very serious athlete? Do you really want to go to the gym every day for several hours? I think it's safe to say probably not. Probably not. You could find other things you want to do. Athletes have to force themselves to take a day off, right? Because they say the body needs to rest and rebuild itself and recover. They push themselves so hard that, again, this goes back to my rowing days. They say don't row every day. Don't take one day off because your body needs to recover if you're going to push yourself that hard during these other 6 days, So, desires of the flesh, fasting. Desires of the eyes, okay? Things that glitter. Prayer, okay? Jesus said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be. Okay? So if my eyes are drawn to things that glitter, all the nice things, all the fancy labels, the fancy cars and whatnot, pray that I could get my perspectives into proper order. And then pride in possessions. Almsgiving. That's an easy one. If I'm like so many people today, if I want more, and bigger and better, how could I fight that? I could take what I have and I could give it away. I could use this money to buy a better widget for myself, a shinier computer, a faster computer, even though my computer is fine. I have no problems with my computer. Right? But I'll just take that money and I'll give it away. And you see how it's mastery of self, getting control of yourself. So those threefold concupiscences go back to the Garden of Eden. They go back to the fall. And Jesus now comes along and tells us, I have the cure. And it's prayer, almsgiving, and fasting are the cure for those three. And those practices, again, we'll look at that when we do our I guess we're going to start that next week, probably, when we look at a deep dive into how do you pray and what is our goal for prayer. The spiritual masters that, we'll look at several more modern spiritual masters that, not by modern, I mean 20th century, who have been world-renowned people that teach bishops how to pray, sort of thing. There are some classic works, and they're usually based on people like St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila and so forth. And they tell us it's a science. It's a science of the saints, they call it. We have so many saints as examples. Mother Teresa, right? Look at what she did. Look at the struggles she had, and look at how she dealt with them. She persevered, she never gave up, and not only did she persevere, again, 3 hours a day minimum, every day, 7 days a week, in adoration before the Blessed Sacrament, before a God who in her heart she felt wasn't there. This is the athlete who says, I can't do yet what I want to do, but I'm going to push, push, push. This is the road to perfection. This is what we need to do to become spiritually perfect. And Jesus himself said, you must be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. There was an old, you may notice, if you ever look at the front page of if you have a New American Bible, it's just standard Catholic Bible, it says Revised New Testament and Revised Psalms. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. There used to be, before the one with the unrevised, that line read, and I can tell you why, that line read, you must be made perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. But that line was actually looked at very carefully in the Second Vatican Council. And the Council Fathers said, wrong, wrong, wrong. First of all, that's not what it says in the Greek, okay? It says, you must be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. There's an active element to that. I've got to do that. I have no choice in the matter. Do I want to get to heaven? I must be perfect, because anything that's not perfect is not going to get into heaven. You must be made perfect. Does that mean I could sit back in my easy chair and sip my Mai Tai and be made, okay, God, whenever you're ready, here I am, make me... No. There was a big switch in the 20th century in spiritual theology, and that's what we're going to look at, because that's how the catechism is based. And the best section of the catechism is actually the fourth section. If anybody needs a catechism, we have catechisms to give you. Let me know and we can give you one. Actually, the people who wrote the catechism said, if you haven't read the catechism and you don't know where to start with the fourth section on prayer, because that is the best written section and the most powerful section to get you going. Okay?
Is anyone here that does not have a Catholic catechism? I guess we've given them.
Okay.
No,
You-
anybody else?
That's sort of the imputed righteousness that is in some of the Protestant traditions, is like this concept of like, you're going to just be passively made to be perfect or righteous, but you're not actually having any involvement. You like say this single prayer, and then God is just going to like declare you righteous, and that's it.
That's right. We're going to see that's part of it, but that's not the whole thing. Catholic spiritual theology says there's two parts. There's ascetical theology, which is based on penance and mortification, and then there's mystical theology, which is what God does to you. So you have to prepare yourself. It's again kind of like the athlete thing. You know, you have to train, you have to work out, you have to eat the right foods, you got to do the right things, and then you'll start to reap the benefits of doing that. You know, there's nothing you could do to get to that state without doing the training and the eating and the whatnot. So ascetical theology is the training, the eating, the doing, the living the right way, not staying out till 3 a.m. at a bar carousing and so forth. And you'll get to the point where now you're prepared for God to start working in you. And there's nothing there that you can do. This is purely God's doing, and that's called mystical theology. That's. I hope that's what you kind of had in mind, Jack, because that's what we're going to be doing. And I'm still in the process of putting it all together, because it kind of exploded on me. When for my graduate studies, a required class was one called spiritual theology, and that was an entire semester. I mean, an entire semester of graduate study. And how am I going to do that in maybe 2 weeks? You know, that's not going to be possible. But I'm going to do my best to kind of cull it down.
Well, I appreciate the research.
It's causing me to,
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. I'm looking at what reviewing for myself stuff I've known about what the spiritual masters say you should be doing to move towards perfection, and I want to hang my head in shame because I'm not doing all that well. But it really does come down to pay now, pay later. And thank God we have purgatory, because that's the pay later part, and it's easier. Like anything else, it's going to be easier to pay now than to pay then. But also the spiritual masters will say, do not shoot for purgatory. Shoot to win. Do what Paul said. Run the race to win it, to go for the gold. Because if you aim for purgatory and miss, what do you get?
See, at one time I thought, I would love to be just in prayer all the time, just, okay. So when I was young, I thought that. And then I said that to some people who were very wise, and they said, the challenge or the final perfection, let's say, is when you unite that spirituality and dealing with the world on a moment-to-moment basis. That's where
that's absolutely right. And that's getting closer to what's so-called the unitive way. And the spiritual masters will say, be careful, there's a danger in that. The danger in that is to say, well, okay, I'll do my best, and I won't take the time for the other aspects of prayer. I'm going to let my work at the hospital, my work at the community outreach, my work at the doing the hospitality, that's going to be, and that's not the same thing. That's not the same thing as a deep spiritual prayer life that allows the work you do at the hospital, at community outreach, at whatever it is you do, has to come out of the prayer life itself. It can't be a substitute for a deep prayer life.
That's the service, and that was about the story about the Marys, that there were a Mary that was always serving, and always. And
Martha
and Mary, yeah, that was that story.
There's actually in 1899, Pope Leo XIII, not the 14th now, Pope Leo XIII, I'm going to point this out when we get there, America has had a heresy named after it. Did you know that? The heresy is called Americanism. It's the attitude of, I could pull myself up by my bootstraps. He said that what Pope Leo XIII said is that I see a real danger in America, and the church in America is going to collapse because you're so focused on doing. I got to build the hospitals, build the schools, build the programs, build this, and you're not stopping to pray. And what happened now? What happened? Is the church collapsing in many ways? Or one of the biggest problems in the crisis of the faith today is people are not praying. Okay, I don't have to pray. I'm working at community outreach, or I'm volunteering at the hospital or at the homeless shelter or something, and that's all good. That's all good, but that's the wrong order. First I pray. First I draw close to God. Then out of that flows the good work. Yeah. That's the Americanism here. Yeah, Kosh.
Augustine and Aquinas also talked a little bit about, like, when they address the question of praying continuously, it's not necessarily like in the words or in the thoughts, or in the thoughts, but it's more so the desire. So if you retain the desire to pray throughout the day and you continually lift it up, then that's what they mean by continual prayer. And then you ought to pray like at moments throughout the day so you can maintain the desire to pray. So that desire to pray is the continual prayer.
Yeah, we'll look at some very modern, well, by modern, 1930s, 1940s works that have really shaped the spiritual theology in the church today about what it means to have a spiritual life. And I think, I'm be honest with you, I'm concerned a lot of it. I don't want it to get dry and boring, because this is not, you're not here to hear dry, and it could get very dry and boring. So it's going to be my job to not make it that. But at the same time, there's a tremendous richness in Catholic theology on the spiritual life. And as I say, we're going to base it around the catechism, because the catechism is basically the fruit, the ripe fruit of all these centuries of, I know what I was going to say, that thing about you must be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. The reason the unrevised Gospel of Matthew says you must be made perfect like your heavenly Father is perfect is because there was a time in Catholic theology where theologians looked at that line that said you must be perfect, but says in the Greek you must be perfect like your Father in heaven, and they said, no, he can't possibly mean that. That's impossible. No. And so there was a tendency, and what the compromise was, okay, monks and cloistered nuns, okay, that's what that means. He's talking about them. But those people lost hands down. The church says no. That perfection is for everybody who calls themselves a Christian. All of us are called to perfection, and we go through these stages of spiritual infancy and childhood and adolescence and adulthood, just like we do in the physical life. So, yeah.
It's easy to imagine people getting discouraged when they think of trying to achieve that level of perfection, or even like seeing someone that's like way holier than you are. Like I'm thinking about like when you're entering into the Christian life and you've been attracted to it, first of all, by seeing somebody else living the authentic Christian life, and you're like, oh, it's possible to be filled with joy and to be filled with, the fruits of the Spirit and all that sort of thing. But then when you start thinking about trying to be perfect as God is perfect, then it's easy to be like, oh man, there's no way. Like you said, I mean, it's
right. Humanly, it's not possible.
Unattainable.
Humanly, it's not possible. But Jesus himself said, with God, all things are possible. Well, God said that. I know, it's like that old thing. It's easy to start a diet right after a nice big lunch, right? Or quitting smoking is easy. I've done it hundreds of times, But the Catechism has a section on that too. We're gonna base this on the Catechism because you all have catechisms, and it talks about that. What happens when you kind of want to give up? And what should you do? Distractions there's lots of things that are what the Catechism calls obstacle to prayers. So I hope it's interesting for you. And I hope, more importantly, I hope it helps all of you grow toward the goal that we all have to be perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect. Because Jesus said, you must be that. You must be that. And we got to start training. We got to start pummeling our bodies, as St. Paul says, to win the race, to win the gold. Paul says, lots of people run the race, but only one person wins. And you see, there's the Americanism heresy that Pope Leo was concerned about. Where are we today? Well, you'll get a participation trophy. So you came in last, but you participated. So here's your certificate and your trophy to go with that. You see, isn't that where we are today? But only one person gets the gold medal. People get upset. Bob, they get upset when if Aubrey were to win silver, she wouldn't be happy. She wants gold.
She was not.
She what?
She was not.
She was not. Gold. You want gold.
I practiced a little bit.
Exactly. I should have pushed myself harder. And that's a perishable prize. That's gold or silver. Silver that will tarnish, and wind up probably who knows where, melted down by your grandkids who don't want this thing because they didn't know you, What about the imperishable prize that we're all shooting for? And then to close the Lord's Prayer thing, the Our Father thing, is the Protestant Our Father, right? For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory now. That thing, First off, that is not a Protestant thing. Any Protestant scripture scholar, any Protestant scripture scholar will tell you that is not in the original Greek version of the Lord's Prayer. The earliest manuscripts do not have that. We could say with reasonably good confidence, Jesus never said those words, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory now and forever. Amen. What happened is in later manuscripts, probably some very, how they had a copy, there wasn't printing presses, right? So they had to copy these things by hand. Probably some monk, very, very pious monk, decided to add those words. And they kind of crept in to the Catholic liturgy in the very early church. We did say that in the earliest centuries. But then, for whatever reason, maybe because it's not in the Bible, so to speak, it kind of fell out of practice. The Greek, the Greek Orthodox, it never fell out of practice. They said it, they've been saying it all along. They said it in the beginning, they say it now, okay? So that, it's called an embolism, right? That for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory. That's not a Protestant thing. That's originally a Catholic thing that we kind of said, that for what, I don't know why, for whatever reason, it kind of fell out of practice in its use, but then came back. That because it's the East says it, and Protestants say it, and we believe it. I mean, it was originally part of our liturgy. Let's put it back in. It's a good thing. So that's don't let anybody tell you that's the Protestant Our Father. All right, I think that's enough. We're probably enough Our Father stuff. Shall we move on to our next topic? Any questions? It's already after 10, so does anybody have anything?
Well, I will say this, you'd be super embarrassed if I said anything, but boy, you'd be proud of Sarah Hakey. She gave the, main benediction speech at our baccalaureate service.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it was beautiful, really beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah. She did great.
Did she graduate first in her class?
She's salutatorian.
Salutatorian, okay,
yeah.
okay.
She got edged out by a couple points on the SAT, I think. The other boy, Juan, he's also, they do kind of like a Bible study together.
Uh-huh.
So her and a couple other kids. So he's also very, he's Protestant, but he's very.
We're going to miss Sarah. She's going to Florida State, I think. And what does she study? Health sciences. I don't know what her long-term
I don't know
health.
exactly what. I think she's getting into health though.
Yeah.
Science.
And I find it hard to believe she's going off to college. She looks like she's maybe 10 years old, but she's not.
I want to share something along the same lines I think is really encouraging. My grandson graduated last night from high school, and I think he was one of 5 speakers. Every single one of them devoted their talk to Jesus Christ and lifted him up and said, unless he's at the center of your life, and we've heard a lot of great things about the future is ours and so forth, but the future will not be ours unless Jesus Christ is at the center of our lives. And it was just really powerful.
Wow. That's good. There's some
people are. I think there's a definite turning of young people toward Jesus.
There certainly is. There certainly is.
My students, absolutely.
Yesterday, our diocese ordained 4 new priests, which is a big number considering how things are going. I mean, there's a lot of big dioceses that don't have any. I have to laugh though. Akash said to me, one of them was a permanent deacon, but his wife died and he became a priest. And Akash said he's really old, And I said,
you couldn't relate.
So I said, just can you clarify what do you mean by really old? He goes, about 50. Maybe we should have, for most of us in the room, we should have somebody come in from a funeral home, help us pick out coffins, do a little pre-planning, since we don't really have any time left,
Hopefully we'll get through this class.
Hopefully we'll make it through OCIA. 50 is really old. Oh boy. Okay. All right. What I want to talk about next is something that I guess it was Andy, if I recall, brought it up last week, and it was about the Jubilee. Okay, and we're always having jubilees. Okay. I want to talk about, you hear the words all the time in the Catholic Church. So it's so easy to, in one ear, out the other, right, is how that goes. What exactly is a Jubilee? Why do we have Jubilees? We're in a Jubilee right now, a Jubilee of St. Francis of Assisi, right? 1184 to 1226. So that's what, 800 years, I think. That's since so we're having a St. Francis Jubilee. We do lots of things with Jubilees, and so let me. I have a handout for Jubilees. I have 3. One for us to look at kind of now, and then. Okay, so, no, that's not it. This is it here. Yeah, start passing those around if you will. Maybe give me one, so just in case technology fails here. And there's, Jubilee goes back, as we're going to see, kind of goes back to It goes back pretty much as far as you can. Okay. So anyway, in terms of the history of the church, about a year ago, there was a good article in America Magazine. Yes, America Magazine. There are some good things in America Magazine every once in a while about the history by Gerald O'Connor. He's a Jesuit that does some nice scholarly writing and so forth. So it talks about the history of the Christian Jubilee. So I brought some copies of those for all of you. And some of that around. And the Jubilee goes back, let me wait till they get around. And the article in America, that's not for us to look at now. That's in case you really want, if you really want to know something about the history of the Jubilee and in Christendom, there you go. But the Jubilee itself goes back to the Old Testament, right? Not even to the Old Testament, to the Torah. Right? Again, you want to understand the New Testament, you want to understand Christianity today, you got to understand the Old Testament. And so the book of Leviticus, and there you go, Ashley, I'll let you pass those around too. If you will have Bibles, I'm sure, but I printed out a copy of Leviticus from, I think, the Revised Standard Version, so you can see. So let me wait for those to kind of get around. And what we'll do, what we don't finish, of course, same thing. What we don't finish this week, we'll finish next week. But I think by next week, we for sure will finish. I don't think it's 10:15 already, so I don't think we'll finish this today. But and then after that, the next idea is going to be prayer. And coming up real soon, I'm going to be away for those 2 weeks taking a class in St. Louis. And so Andy is going to talk about, Andy's talk on Islam, right? What every Catholic needs to know. That should be fascinating. And Andy, you're kind of, it's good if you want it, you're going to want to have it in the parish hall, I guess, to fit more people. Hospitality is going to be finished by then. Next week is the last week for hospitality. And it's hard to give a class in the hall while hospitality is going on. We've tried that. It does not work because the hospitality people want to have their hospitality and laughter and talking.
I can talk over them.
I have a hard time.
I got to think about it. I can do it.
I have a hard time with it myself. I find
So during
during
this summer, we're not going to be hospitable.
we're not going to be hospitable. Next week is the last hospitality until September.
Okay, I'll have to remember that and just frown at anyone that comes.
I'll tell me how the tech will work.
Okay. And hopefully it will work.
So you're going to give your talks in the hall
Yes, ma'am.
for both weeks?
Yes.
June 14th and 21st, 2 hours each Sunday.
And we're going to put it in the bulletins.
That's what I was going to say. Should we?
Yeah. That's why we're going to do it. Let the parish, whoever wants to go, go. And you give a plug to get people to come to OCIA too.
Okay.
What's that?
I said
Yeah,
I
so-
was
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Sebastian said everyone who comes will get a plenary indulgence.
Or at least a free donut.
Could you fix the parking ticket for us? That's one fancy blue button.
Yeah. So, the idea of Jubilee, it's a Jewish idea, okay? I should have brought my ram's horn. And we'll see, it's a special number, although as Christians we're not big on actually adhering to that number. We've been celebrating Jubilees. Christianity has been celebrating its own Jubilees throughout its 2,000-year history. Jubilee is linked to the number 7 in Hebrew Sheva. And that's the same understanding, the same number as a covenant. Okay, so if we spoke like Jews, it would be, if to make a covenant with you, if I were to make a covenant with you, I would like make a Shabbat with you. I would 7 with you. 7 is the number for perfection. It's the number for fullness or completion. It's the number for the covenant. And we'll get to that. Today, Jubilees occur roughly every 25 years. Some years back, Pope John Paul II, who is dead now, announced, we had a Jubilee last year, the 2025 Jubilee, the Jubilee of Hope. Why was there a Jubilee in 2025? Well, because in the year 2000, we began a new millennium, right? The third millennium. And so the thinking was, okay, we have hope for this new millennium. And so 25 years later, 2025, we celebrate the Jubilee of Hope. But there was also what was known as an extraordinary Jubilee in the year, Jubilee of Mercy in the years 2015, 2016. This year, as I said, we are celebrating the Jubilee of St. Francis of Assisi, who died in 1226, so we're celebrating 800 years of Franciscan spirituality. So really, when you get right down to it, we're not as strict with this as are Jews. For us as Christians, Jubilees happen when they happen. Okay? Pope Francis called for, and people are already preparing for, the Jubilee of the year 2033. Why? Because, well, that's what happened in the year 33. You know, that's traditionally the year Christ died on the cross. And so 2033, 2,000 years later, we're going to be having the Jubilee of the 2,000th anniversary of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So that's, it's kind of like celebrations that kind of last a year, you know, year-long celebrations to highlight some important event in our spiritual life. And, you know, if you want to be free and easy about it, there's lots of things to highlight in our spiritual life, you know, like the great St. Francis of Assisi, or, you know, the 2000th anniversary of the death and resurrection of Jesus, or the 25 years into our new millennium, and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so I'm not going to go into all the detail here. That's why I brought that article. And I think, Bob, I don't know, that's probably copyrighted information that I just distributed. So please don't tell your daughter that I did that.
Yeah, okay. She gets mad at me when I make a copy of the song.
If it's still the same, you can make up to, I think it's 35 reproductions as long as you're not selling them and you're within copyright.
Oh, okay, Greg. So I think I made 30 copies. So now I'll remember that. I could make 34 copies and get away with it. Thank you. Thank you. No, I don't. You don't have. You can go ahead. Tell Suzanne. Go ahead and tell her. So it's. I think I read. You know, it's a year old now, but it's a good article on the history of the Jubilee, and it brings out several interesting points. It's not a Christian idea. It's a Jewish idea, and it's marked by the sounding of the ram's horn. Do you know the shofar? I have one at home. I've never been able to get a sound out of it myself. I've tried. Scott Smolensky has a ram's horn that he uses during when did he use it? Palm Sunday? Is it Palm Sunday? I think it's Palm Sunday. He blows the ram's horn. He can get. Mine is a little one, you know. It's about that. So is his. But some of these ram's horns, I'd love to, you know, a big ram's horn, you know. And the ones that you see pictures of are those big blowing of the ram's horn. In Hebrew, it's called a yobel. Okay, that's where we get the word jubilee from. It comes from yobel. Yobel is the name for the ram's horn, the shofar, in Hebrew. And another name you hear for Jubilee in the Christian calendar is the Holy Year, because it always kind of begins and ends with liturgical acts. Usually there's some sort of the Pope or somebody like that opens it up with a mass at Rome, and it lasts a year, and it concludes with a mass by the Pope in Rome. And its whole purpose is to encourage a life of holiness, strengthening the faith, acts of charity, fraternal love. For Christians, for Catholics, it only started officially in the year 1300 with Pope Boniface VIII that picked up on this Jewish idea, and he didn't make any reference to the Jewish roots of it. He just thought, what a good idea, let's have a jubilee, without any reference to the book of Leviticus or anything like that. And that because that was a time when Christendom as a whole, kind of like today, is suffering. It's caused there's wars and diseases and plagues and a breaking away from the faith. So Pope Boniface said, let's have this jubilee to kind of inspire people for a more holy way of living. I'll tell you, about a year ago, I was asked by a group of Dominicans to give a talk on the Jubilee to them. And at the time, there was a brand new book that came out by John Bergsma. You may know John Bergsma. He's a very popular Catholic Christian, writer from Steubenville, St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology, that place.
He used to be a Methodist preacher.
He's a convert, yes. He used to be a Methodist. And he wrote that book. I think I gave you the title of it there, Jesus and the Jubilee, the Biblical Roots. And I said, oh, good, I'm going to have to give this talk. I read the book and I said, I didn't use any of it. And I said I could do a better job myself. I just, for whatever reason, I didn't like his presentation, so I came up with my own presentation for them. So whatever I really much have to say, with few exceptions, is mine. And I'll show you one place, though, where I did go for the Jewish roots of understanding, because it is deeply rooted in the Old Testament. And again, if you want to understand the New Testament, you must first understand the Old Testament. Okay? So to understand Jubilee, I thought it was important to first go and ask ourselves the question, what do Jews think about Jubilee? Okay? And I found this book, and I love this book. Carol knows this book too. It's by a rabbi named David Baum, and the title is The Non-Orthodox Jew's Guide to Orthodox Jews. Okay? And the subtitle is Why We Do What We Do, Wear What We Wear, and Think What We Think. Okay? And it's a very good book. Now, he knows his Jewish faith very, very, very well. He does not know the Catholic faith very well at all, but that does not stop him from spouting off some opinions about the Catholic faith. And so there are some parts of this book that are very aggravating. I'd love to get a hold of him and say, you've got it all wrong, but that's okay. Pass it around if you want to see it. Okay. But, the bottom line is this. If you were to create a religion, okay, would you include laws in it that seemed ridiculous, if not impossible to fulfill? Not too different than the words of Jesus, you must be perfect like your Father in heaven is perfect. Okay? Your first reaction to that, the human reaction is, but that's not possible. That's impossible. That's silly. That book talks about how Orthodox Jews understand Jubilee. Okay? And he does a good job of explaining the Jubilee from an Orthodox perspective. And if you understand the Jewish idea of Jubilee, you have to ask yourself some questions. Would you decree that every 7 years, okay, again, Jubilee, covenant, Shabbat, 7, would you decree that every 7 years people had to quit their jobs and not earn money for the entire year? That's what Leviticus asks for. would you decree that every single citizen of Israel, of the nation of Israel, ancient Israel, and Israel today, including those in the armed forces, would have to abandon their towns and their villages and their bases 3 times a year and assemble in one city at the center of the country? That would have been Jerusalem at the time. As a matter of fact, one of those 3 pilgrim festivals is happening right now. Shavuot, right? Pentecost, and Pentecost is Greek. Shavuot is Hebrew. It commemorates primarily it commemorates the giving of the 10 Commandments by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. And that's a so-called pilgrimage feast. That means, well, every person, what that means is every male adult must go to Jerusalem and celebrate that feast. And Jews have 3 such feasts. Pesach, Passover, is a pilgrimage feast. Jesus used to do it, right? Jesus would travel down to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. This one, Shavuot, Pentecost. That's why all these people were in Jerusalem and they were saying, what's going on here? I don't speak people from all over the known world, that Mesopotamian world, spoke different languages, and yet they all heard the apostles preaching in their language. And they're saying, how could this be? How could these Jews be preaching in a language that I understand? That's why that happened, because there are people from, again, kind of all over the world, or the known world, that part of the world, that had to come to celebrate the Shavuot, the Pentecost, the giving of the law, and the harvest of the first fruits. It's also a harvest festival. The idea is you take the first 10% of your harvest, the first fruits, which are usually the best fruits, and you offer them to the Lord. So it's celebrated by taking sheaves of barley and waving them in the air, and honoring the Lord by offering them. He gave us the gift of the harvest. We're taking the 10% of it, the best 10% of it, and giving it back to Him. And that's the Feast of First Fruits, they also call it, okay? The Pentecost, Feast of First Fruits. And what does St. Paul say about that feast? That Jesus is who? He is the first fruits of a new creation. Creation is, again, started anew, a return to the garden, a restoration of the Garden of Eden, first fruits of a new creation. Anyway, that's why I gave you, laws that seem ridiculous, like I just said, and that's why I gave you the chapter 25 of Leviticus, Vayikra in Hebrew, and he called. For Bereshit is what we call Genesis, Shemot is Exodus, and then Vayikra is Leviticus, and he called in Hebrew. Chapter 25. Jews are commanded to let the entire land of Israel lie fallow for one entire year every 7th year. Now, this is not rotation farming where you only, you let 1/7 of your land lie fallow so that the soil can restore itself. This is absolutely everything. The commandment in Leviticus stipulates that, and this, I'm saying all this because this is where we get our understanding of Jubilee from. Jesus will quote these words and say, now, here I am. The Jubilee has begun, what this whole Jubilee was. So it's important for us to understand what Jews understand as Jubilee, because again, like everything else in the Old Testament, it's pointing to Jesus. Everything, absolutely everything in the Old Testament is like a big orange glowing flashing arrow saying Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Everything that you scratch your head about like this and say, why would they do that? It's explained in the New Testament, in the coming of Christ. Okay? So every 7th year, every square inch of land in Israel must remain untouched for a full calendar year. No farming, no harvesting, not even the clearing of weeds. Okay, and in there, I didn't think did I highlight it? I don't remember if I highlighted. It says in Leviticus, every 7 years, you and your family should basically, I didn't hide, this is my way of putting it. Every 7 years, you and your family should be prepared to starve to death. That's basically what it's telling you to do. Okay? If the people don't plant, what will they eat? Well, the author of the Torah, and of course, who is the author of the Torah? And where did Moses get it from? God. Who gave Moses the Torah? God gave Moses the Torah, right? The author of the Torah, and that includes the book of Leviticus. It anticipates that question. It says, and if you ask, what will we eat? This should be in your handout. It's Leviticus 25, verses 20 to 22. And if you ask, what will we eat in the 7th year, being that we will not sow or harvest our crops? I will command my blessing to you in the 6th year, and the crop will suffice for the 3 years. You will sow in the 8th year and continue to eat from the old crop until the 9th year. Until the arrival of the 9th year's crop, you will eat the old. So in other words, 3 years, because for 1 year you do nothing, and then the following year you plant, and what you plant you don't get until the 3rd year, right? So that's why there's this 3-year thing. So God said, I got this all figured out. I know what your problem is. I know you need to eat. So this is how we're going to do it. And, this commandment was given to an agrarian society, right, whose whole life was centered around agriculture. If we were to kind of rephrase that for our modern ears, it would be like the commandment to say to quit your job at the end of the 6th year and earn no money during the 7th year. And you're also told, don't worry about it, because somehow checks will miraculously appear in the mail. No bills are going to show up that year. Everything will be suddenly so inexpensive that you will be able to spend very little money or no money and still have it. Somehow you will be able to afford your current lifestyle without earning a penny. Okay? I mean, does it matter what prophet might guarantee this promise? After you quit your job, you're not going to have, you're not going to listen to them. You're going to say, this guy is nuts. This guy is crazy. But it's not a prophet that gives us those words. It's the Lord himself. The Lord is the Lord presented the book of Leviticus to Moses. This comes from God himself. And Leviticus continues. If that commandment weren't audacious enough, God throws in another commandment. He says, after 7 cycles of 7 years, so in other words, after a kind of a jubilee of jubilees, so after 49 years, for the 50th year, the entire Jewish nation is to celebrate the Yovel, the Jubilee year, and observe the same agricultural restrictions again. So again, this means absolutely no farming of any kind in the 49th year due to the first 7-year requirement, and no farming again in the 50th year due to the Yovel year. And there are other aspects of the Yovel year in the Torah that we won't even get into all of them right now, but it's like forgiveness of debt, freeing of slaves, the return of ancestral land, other requirements that beyond the agriculture. Because remember, back then, if you went into debt, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, there's Jubilee buried in that, because if somebody can't pay you a debt, you would take his land. You would have the right to do that, to pay off the debt, okay? And his family would become subservient to you, your slaves, basically. Well, no, sorry. After that 50th year, that Jubilee of Jubilees, you got to give him his land back. And if somebody owes you money, if somebody owes you a lot of money, you got to forgive the debt. How's that for extreme? How's that for? That's Jubilee.
Well, imagine it was hard to find the loan the year before.
What's that?
I imagine it was hard to find the loan the year before.
I was thinking that Spam would have helped, but they can't eat that.
Is it pork and spam? Okay, you have to store up the MREs, the military rations, that last 25 years. Maybe that's why they have 25-year rations for those military foods, in case we decide we're going to take this Jubilee stuff seriously.
I think Akash has a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, with the forgiveness of debts in the 50th year, the book of Daniel, the 490 years.
Yeah.
It's like
Yep.
Christ forgiving the debt of sin.
We talked about that not too long ago, right? I think that came up in one of, we're kind of going to cycle around, so we'll get that again. What Akash is talking about is that the angel Gabriel, interestingly, the angel Gabriel appears to Daniel, who is living in exile, and gives him basically a prediction to the day, practically, or certainly to the year when the Messiah will come, when the debts of Israel, the debt of sin, the debt of slavery will be and if you do the math, it's spectacular. This happens like 800 years, in the Old Testament day. If you do the math and you do the counting of the Jubilees, it puts you in the year 33 AD when Israel's sins will be forgiven. It's astounding. So, you often hear people talking about in homilies and stuff, people in the time of Jesus were living in a time of great expectation. They knew the Messiah was coming. And this wasn't just hope, positive thinking, wishful thinking. They knew Daniel. They knew the prophecy of Daniel. And Daniel gave this almost precise prediction about when Israel would find freedom. And it did, not necessarily in the way they thought it would, but it did. Okay? So, again, add to that the pilgrimage feasts I mentioned, Shavuot, Pentecost now, right? Passover, Passover, we call Easter for us, what Passover was pointing to, and then Sukkot, the harvest festival. Those were 3 times a year that all male adults had to travel to the temple in Jerusalem to celebrate those feasts. So that means, now this is in Israel, that's even today, for example, there is no temple anymore, so it's kind of a different temple was destroyed in 70 AD. But that would mean that soldiers would have to leave their posts and go to Jerusalem. Leave their posts unguarded. Don't worry, God will take care of it. Imagine Israel. We could almost think that in America. Yeah, okay, we'll be fine for a couple days, But in Israel, you wouldn't be probably fine for a couple days, right? They live in the height of. And remember, the Holy Family did this. Remember the finding of the boy Jesus in the temple? That story. That's what the Holy Family would. They rigidly followed the Jewish customs. They were a Jewish family, and they went down to celebrate the feast of I think it was Sukkot, and that's when coming back they said, "Who's Jesus? Isn't he with you?" "No, I thought he was with you." And, I don't know how much of a tangent I want to get off on that one now. When I can. And they found Jesus where? And when they said, "Jesus, how could you have done this to us?" What was his answer?
Must be about my Father's business.
And how old was Jesus at the time? 12. How old were you when you bar mitzvah? 13. Before your bar mitzvah, you're not allowed to go into the temple without your father. How come Jesus was in there at 12? There's one exception to that Jewish rule. Right? If you don't have a father, if your father is dead, if your father is whatever, you can go into the temple as early as age 12. You don't have to wait till 13. So you see, why would it matter that Luke is telling us that Jesus was 12 years old? What does that matter? It was a young Jesus. He's telling us again, underscoring the point that Jesus did not have a human father. Right? He's had a foster father, Joseph. Now, foster fathers are as real as foster fathers are real fathers, right? I don't want to take away. I have an adopted daughter, and she's not my adopted daughter, she's my daughter. And I'm not her adopted father, I'm her father. But still, strictly speaking, she has a biological father somewhere. A Jewish boy at age 12 can enter the temple if he no longer has a father. And Luke is trying to tell us there Jesus did not have a human father. God is his father. Okay, so that's why he gives us that little detail. But Luke chapter, what is that I have it here? Luke chapter 2 says, every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of Passover. It was Passover they went for. When he was 12 years old. Why would we care? That's why we care. They went up according to the festival custom. So 3 times a year, the Holy Family, and because it was dangerous traveling in those days, robbers and all that stuff, you would go in caravans. That was the issue, right? And somewhere the kids are, kind of like in this room, kids are probably all over the place, right? I thought they were with you. No, I thought they were with you. That sort of thing. So, the bottom line is I'm telling you these ridiculous things because it shows that no human being is the author of the Torah, right? It contains laws that no rational human being would ever decree. Okay? The question is, I've told you how many times, is whenever I speak about sacred scripture, be it in this setting or in a homily or whatever, when you come across something in the Bible that says, come on, you got to be kidding me, this is incredible, or this is impossible. Yeah? Never ask the question, can this really be true? That's the wrong question to ask. The wrong question to ask. When you come across something that sounds impossible, the right question to ask is, what does this mean? What is God trying to tell me by? What is God trying to teach me? Why would God give me laws that are seemingly impossible to follow? And of course, the short answer is to make obvious our total dependence upon God. Without God, the laws of the Torah, the laws of our faith even, are impossible. But as Jesus himself says in Matthew chapter 19, verse 26, with God, all things are possible. So never say this is impossible when coming across something in Scripture, like you must be perfect, like your Father in heaven is perfect. But it's possible with the grace of God, if I surrender to God's will. Okay? And what is God trying to do here with this idea of Jubilee? Well, as I said earlier today, as I said so many times, Jesus is the new Adam. Okay? Jesus has come to undo the sin of the first Adam and the damage he has caused. And as I said earlier, as I often say, Jesus has come to restore paradise, to restore the Garden of Eden, where God first reveals the purpose of creation and points toward the incarnation. Okay? And the reason, you know it well, and thanks to Audrey, you now really know it well. You have to keep it in front of your eyes like your own phylactery every day. Keep these words ever before your eyes. The reason that return to the garden, the reason for our very creation is sentence number 1 in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. God infinitely, I should let Marisol there she is. They can read it. That's right. That's cheating. God infinitely perfect and blessed in himself, in a plan of sheer goodness, freely created man to make him share in his own blessed life. Believe it or not, the Jubilee itself is hidden in those words. And as rich, as we talked about it, as rich and concise as that statement is, it's, go back to the, does anybody need a Baltimore catechism? You all have Baltimore catechisms? Yes? If you need, raise your hand if you need a Baltimore catechism. Okay, we need a couple.
Oh, three?
Because that's answered by I love the Baltimore Catechism in that it's written so that anybody could understand it, okay? That's a beautiful statement, God infinitely perfect, but yeah, okay, wow, what does that mean exactly? We need to spend some time unwrapping that. But the Baltimore Catechism cuts right to the chase there. Why did God make you? God made you to know Him, love Him, and serve Him in this life and be happy with Him in the next forever. Okay? Notice there's nothing implicit about happiness in this life, right? The thing in this life is to know, love, and serve God. And when you do that, you're happy with Him forever in the next life. Both of those statements, be it the one fancy one on your picture from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, or the one I just said from the Baltimore Catechism, which now you all have, reveal one critical idea, and that is that God created us out of love, and He wants us to return to Him. There's I think you have it in your handout there, an idea that's been put forward by many Catholic theologians. It's the idea of exitus et reditus in Latin. Exitus, to exit. We come from God. That's what exitus means. We issue forth from God. God created us. Why did He create us? For the reditus, for us to return to Him. This is what it's all about. We come from God and we are to return to God. And God's creative act in the book of Genesis, in the very, very, very beginning, reveals the first Jubilee. The ultimate human freedom from slavery to sin. You all know the story. I think you all know the story. On the sixth day of creation, what is the pinnacle of God's creation? Now, some people might say the pinnacle of God's creation is the creation of man. Some people like to say, well, He created woman after He created man, so woman is the pinnacle, right? But we won't go there because that. But we could say, well, okay, the creation of humanity is God's greatest creation, but that's not so. Right? The creation, the crowning glory of creation, the thing that it's all about is the seventh day. Shavah, 7. The seventh day, the Sabbath day, the day of rest, the day of Jubilee. So you see, even in God's creation, the idea of Jubilee is built into that. The Shavah, the covenant, the seventh day. The seventh day God rested. And God didn't need to rest, right? I mean, that's silly. You have to explain that to children. No, that's not how God. That's not how God is. He doesn't get tired. And so, what does it mean that God rested? Why does God rest on the seventh day? Look at Genesis chapter 2, verse 3. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all His work which He had done in creation. God is rest Himself, eternal, unchanging rest, pure, unchanging being. God never changes. If He changes, what does it mean to change? It means you either get better or you get worse. Well, God can't get any better than He is, and God is not going to. God is eternal, unchanging rest, eternal rest. And the Sabbath day is not, in a sense, a cessation of work by God. God works on the Sabbath by blessing the Sabbath. That's what God does, is He blesses. That's God's work. He blesses the Sabbath day, a day of Jubilee. And Jesus picked up on that. When they were giving Him a hard time, when the religious leaders were saying, you violate the Sabbath, you work on the Sabbath, Jesus Himself said in John's Gospel, and this is why the Jews persecuted Jesus, because He healed on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, my Father is working, and And I am still working. Remember, I am is an Old Testament reference to God. That's the I am who am, is when Moses asked God at the burning bush, who are you? God answered him, I am who am. You know, we get that unutterable name, that Yahweh, Tetragrammaton, that name that humans can't even say. It is so holy. God is I am, eternal, unchanging being, eternal, unchanging rest. To bless, to sanctify means to make holy, and to make that which is blessed receive the very life of God, to put it back in communion with God. It's why we bless objects in the Catholic Church, in a sense to make them sacred, to set them apart for God. These objects, in a sense, can receive the life of God, which the Church has the authority to do. Right? When I bless something, who cares if my blessing is not my blessing, it's the Church's blessing, to whom Jesus has given the authority to act in his name. That's what means when a priest or a deacon or a bishop blesses. That's what he's doing. He's making that, setting that object apart for God. That's why we treat blessed objects with respect, right? We don't throw them away. When we have to destroy them, we bury them or burn them or do some sort of honorable, when they've come to their end. When you have an old crucifix that's been blessed and it's falling apart, you don't throw it in the garbage. It's been blessed. It has, in a sense, God's life has been imparted to it through that blessing. So you bury it some people bury things right here in the church. Okay? When God blesses man at creation, he restores in man the image and likeness of God in which he was created. That was lost at the fall. And when we're blessed, and there's a blessing at our baptism, again, that image and likeness of God that was lost after the fall has now been restored in us. And so this is God's rest. God's rest is to make his creation holy. And this is the purpose of the incarnation and the mission of Jesus. The incarnation, the mission of Jesus is one big jubilee, if you like, which is why we like to have all these jubilees. Jesus does in a physical way what the Father does from all eternity, to restore in his mercy God's intention for man from the beginning, from the Garden of Eden. That's the whole purpose of what Jesus does and why he does it. To reveal that God wishes to restore in us what he gave us in the beginning before we screwed it up. Okay. And for this, the enemies of Jesus set themselves against Jesus when he heals on the Sabbath. When Jesus' hungry disciples pick grain from the field and eat it on the Sabbath, and they say, look at that, your disciples. Actually, I think they said they broke like 7 laws when they did that. They worked 7, the harvesting and the shucking and the peeling and the Jews would count 7 things that they did wrong by picking that grain on the Sabbath and then eating it. And Jesus said to them, what? If you knew what this means, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless, for the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. And Jesus, again, an allusion to the book of Daniel, Jesus himself is that Son of Man who is the Lord of the Sabbath. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. The Sabbath day is the day of rest, the day of mercy. And Jubilee is a time of mercy, a season of mercy. And I'll tell you something, we are all in desperate, desperate need of mercy. Does everybody understand that? Do we all understand that? What we deserve? Every single last one of us deserves to go to hell. That's what we deserve. Right? Don't think that, well, I'm not that. Yes, you are. But Jesus, I'm not that trying. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. I don't care if you're the Pope. Every last one of us deserves to go to hell. If not for the blood of that cross and the mercy of God, we would all go to hell. That's what I desire, mercy, not sacrifice. That's why Jubilee, a time for mercy, a time when we acknowledge that we are in desperate need of God's mercy and ask God for that mercy. So God, who is infinitely perfect and blessed in himself, blesses his creation, making it holy and restoring it to himself through the mission of Jesus. This was the whole purpose, is to restore the Garden of Eden. This is why Jesus came and what he did. And what does Jesus say in John's Gospel? We've been reading a lot from John's Gospel in our liturgies, right? For I have not, chapter 12, I have not spoken on my own authority. The Father who sent me has himself given me the commandment what to say and what to speak. And I know that his commandment is eternal life. What I say, therefore, I say as the Father has bidden me. And Jesus came and he said what? In that synagogue of Nazareth, when he unrolled the scroll, Jubilee, the words of Jubilee from the prophet Isaiah, to set liberty to captives, freedom from debt, freedom to slavery, freedom. But well, I don't see the credit card company forgiving my debt every 7 years, right? I don't have any slaves. Slavery ended in 1865, right? Because can't end of slavery. What slavery? Not to the things that, I mean, those are what we see with our eyes, right? We see debt, we see slavery, but slavery from the debt of sin. Remember, we talked in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us the best translation of the Our Father is forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, because the Jewish understanding of sin is that of a debt incurred again to God. You owe God a debt because of your sin. Freedom from slavery. What kind of? I don't have any slaves. Slavery. I am a slave. Slavery to sin. And Jesus has come to set me free from that slavery to sin. Freedom to return to the home that I was taken from by sin. What home? Jesus said, in my Father's house there are many dwellings. If there were not, would I have told you so, that I am going to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I'll come back and bring you to where I am. Right? We see how Jesus inaugurates God's mission of mercy. That's the great Jubilee of Jubilees. With the words, these are the words spoken by the prophet Isaiah that Jesus spoke in Luke's Gospel when he inaugurates his public ministry in that synagogue in Nazareth, when he said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, the recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. The acceptable year of the Lord is the Jubilee. Okay, that's the Jubilee of the Messiah, the one who the Father sends to restore creation to its proper order, creation that's been wounded by sin. Now, I'm wondering how, maybe I'm looking at the clock, and so I don't start to give bums rush to stuff again. Maybe we should, it's 10:58, maybe we should stop here and just continue with this, finish it up. We'll finish it up for sure next time. But any question, we have a minute or two, any questions? Is this all making sense?
Don't we say Jesus is our Sabbath? Because a lot of people ask, why don't you, we keep the Sabbath, kind of.
Well, Jews have a problem. I have my Jewish friends that say, how come you went and changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday? Officially, Saturday is still the Sabbath, okay? And Sunday is the Lord's Day. Yeah? But now, what they don't understand in a certain sense is that the Gospel of John, talking about a new creation, and Jesus being the first fruits of that new creation. So now there's a new eternal eighth day, an eighth day that never ends. That's kind of, if you want to call it, a new Sabbath. And that's why we celebrate on a Sunday and not a Saturday. Unlike the Seventh-day Adventists, they think we're... Yeah, because we went and changed the Sabbath. We didn't change. I mean, it's Jesus that inaugurated that new eighth day. He rose on the eighth day. That sanctified the eighth day in a way that, different is what the Sabbath was pointing to, that restoration of the covenant of Eden, the Garden of Eden. So, yeah, I mean, I've never heard that expression before, that Jesus is our Sabbath, but maybe in that sense is what that means, right? That he established a new 8th day, a new Sabbath day. But Protestants say a lot of things that I'm not familiar with, because there are so many Protestants saying so many things that you can't quite keep up with them all.
Depends on who started the church, and whoever started that particular.
That's right.
That's the conclusion I came to. That's why I came out.
There you go. There you go. Other questions? Other comments? Rude remarks? Whatever. I don't care. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. You've got a Florida State shirt. Everybody here wears Gator shirts, don't they?
Sorry about that.
Make sure you bring the handout next week.
You only have one of the other one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, one's spiritual, one's
Thank you. Just go to the office and schedule it so they know about it. I'm happy to do it whenever you want to do it. June 28th, so what day is that? What do you think?
I left my phone at home. Sure.
Carol.
We have family coming in, so we're trying to.
June 28th is a Sunday.
It's a Sunday.
It's a Sunday, okay. And I will be back. I'm going to be away from like the 10th to the 19th, maybe. No. From the 10th to the 24th, so I'll be back to the 28th. But just so that the office knows, so they can have the sacristans prepare for what we need, tell them, talk to me.